I'll never forget the story of the white gorilla. Genetically modified to be perfectly white, the infant Kesi was nothing more than a science experiment. But what happened one spring morning proved that love knows no boundaries. It was proof that memory is incredibly powerful, and that a goodbye can be experienced in its purest form. Emma Carter had worked with primates for 42 years, showing them a compassion many humans couldn't. But nothing in her life was as much of a turning point as the night she raided that laboratory. It was 2006, and controversial experiments in genetic engineering were gaining momentum. Emma, a researcher for a private animal rights organization, had been watching a laboratory she suspected for months. That night, she finally managed to get inside, and what she saw shook her deeply. In a small cage in the middle of the cold, sterile room lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. All the other gorillas in the surrounding cages were dark-colored, natural-looking. But this infant was different, defying the laws of nature. When she looked at the files, she learned the truth. This was one of the first genetically modified gorilla infants. Not albino, but the result of deliberate intervention. Scientists had tampered with its genetics to display it as a rare species, perhaps even to sell it to wealthy collectors. But right now, that tiny being was living without a mother, without love, only as an experimental object. I can only imagine what Emma felt. At that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't leave this infant here. That night, risking her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, she took Kesi out of there. She named him herself Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language, because he was hope for Emma. He was proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days weren't easy. Kesi had been traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembled in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him, warmed milk, put him to sleep singing lullabies for hours, slowly gaining his trust by showing him she was there every time he woke up. As months passed, the bond between them grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. He didn't just develop physically. His intelligence, his ability to empathize, and his loving gaze amazed everyone, as if he was now receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. When he turned 3, Kesi was already too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, rested his huge head on her knees, and waited for her hands to wander through his fur. This ritual was the most sacred moment for Emma, a time for a silent conversation they both shared. Emma taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, even how to open a simple lock. She had shown him this last skill as a fun activity. A metal lock, small buttons turned in the right sequence. Kesi thought it was a game, but actually it was one of the most important gifts Emma had given him: the ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he was already over 200 kilon. His white fur literally glowed in the sunlight, while his amber eyes carried deep wisdom. Emma could no longer keep him at home. This would be dangerous and wrong, but the solution she found was the best for him. The local rehabilitation center agreed to accept Kesi. This was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection with large areas. Kesi would be safe there, cared for by experts, and able to move freely in a large area. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her. There was an understanding in those big eyes, as if he knew, as if he understood that Emma thought this was best for him. And as she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time, whispered in his ear one last time, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face one last time. Those giant fingers touched hers, as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. According to the center's rules, she couldn't make direct contact, but just watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her. It was as if he was speaking, saying, "Mom, you're here. Everything is." Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, I'll never forget the story of Emma and Kesi, a mother and son separated by circumstance, reunited after a decade. But their reunion was against the backdrop of a cruel disease. Emma's body was betraying her. First, the strength in her legs diminished, and then her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The diagnosis came: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease, a merciless progressive illness. Within a year, she could no longer walk. She was confined to a wheelchair, her speech slurred and strained. It was a cruel imprisonment because her mind remained sharp, her feelings deep. That, I think, was the most painful aspect for her. She understood everything, felt everything, but couldn't fully express anything. Visiting Kesi became impossible. Her failing health simply wouldn't allow it. Months passed since she'd last seen him, and the absence began to consume her. She knew her time was running out, and she desperately wanted to see him one last time. Just one last time. Her sister, Sarah, understanding the gravity of the situation, devised a plan. She contacted the Rehabilitation Center, secured special permission, and one spring morning, on a day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, she wheeled Emma into the center. As the wheelchair rolled along the center's main path, people cast sympathetic glances at Emma, but she noticed none of them. Her attention was fixed on one thing only. In the distance, in a large outdoor enclosure, Kesi stood like a white giant. Sarah slowly pushed the chair toward the garden area, the spring sun warm on Emma's face, cherry blossoms landing in her hair. But Emma only wanted to see him. Kesi, her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi had his back turned, sitting on a large rock. Emma tried to call out to him, but no words came, only rasping sounds. Tears streamed down her face. Being this close and yet unable to see him was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she said softly. But at that moment, as if by a miracle, Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of her strained voice. Or maybe it was instinct. But when that huge head turned, his amber eyes found Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Kesi's eyes locked onto hers. And in that moment, all the noise in the world seemed to fade away. There was only the woman and the gorilla. Mother and son, two souls reunited after years. Kesi slowly stood. His massive body, over 200 kilograms, moved with surprising grace. As he walked toward the bars, there was purpose in every step. He was coming to Emma. He had seen her, and he remembered. When he reached the bars, He stopped, gripping the cold metal. His head bowed, his eyes still fixed on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and almost human, as if in pain. It was one of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they are sad. Sarah brought the chair closer until only a meter separated Kesi and Emma. The bars were the only barrier between them. Emma tried to reach out with her trembling hand, but she lacked the strength. When Kesi understood, he extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers. The touch was like an electric shock. 10 years. She hadn't been able to fully touch him for 10 years. Now those giant fingers intertwined with hers. Warm, soft, familiar. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? Emma didn't know. But in that moment, she knew they were both feeling the same pain. A word fell from her mouth. Kai. That huge head bowed even further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. Then, something extraordinary happened. Kesi pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly to the side, examined the lock on the edge of the bars. Then he took action. It was the simple lock mechanism Emma had taught him as a game years ago. 3 buttons that, when turned in a specific sequence, would open the door. A simple but effective system designed to prevent visitors from accidentally opening the enclosure. But Kesi remembered. He turned the first button right, the second button left, the third button right. A click sounded. The lock had opened. Sarah gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. Sunlight caught his white fur, creating a halo. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched, bringing his face near hers. His giant hand reached out, his fingers touching Emma's face with incredible gentleness, like caressing a child. He took a cherry blossom petal from her hair, examined it, and placed it carefully on the ground. Then he rested his massive head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security, visitors, staff. No one dared to breathe. It wasn't just animal behavior they were witnessing, but a meeting of souls. A farewell, perhaps, after years apart. Emma raised a trembling hand, feeling the warm, soft fur between her fingers. Tears flowed, but now they were tears of gratitude. Kesi made a soft, almost human-like whimpering sound, the kind gorillas make only in moments of deep emotion, as if saying, "Mom, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words, difficult and choppy, fell from Emma's lips. "I love you, Kesi." Kesi lifted his head slightly, looking at her. There were no tears in his amber eyes, but there was understanding, acceptance, as if he knew her time was short. His giant hand then reached for the wheelchair armrest, examining the metal edges with care. He placed his hand on Emma's hand. Their hands joined under the falling cherry blossoms. Emma realized Kesi was being careful, protecting her from the wheelchair's sharp edges. His movements were calculated, controlled. He knew she was fragile. Minutes passed. No one interfered. The security teams lowered their weapons. They saw love, not a threat. Dr. Alan Thompson, the center's director, stepped forward. His eyes welled up behind his glasses. He had worked with animals for years, but never witnessed such a bond. "The most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his voice trembling. This is something even science can't explain." Sarah was crying. Other visitors silently shed tears. Everyone understood that this wasn't just a woman and a gorilla, but a universal bond, a mother's love that knew no species, no time, no distance. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, and wiped the tears from her eyes with his finger, a gesture of compassion and love. Emma wanted to say more, but words weren't enough. Kesi understood. He knew everything she wanted to tell him. "You are my son," she said, with her last strength. Kesi rested his head on Emma's knees again. This wasn't goodbye, but a moment of gratitude for the beautiful gift they had given each other. Cherry blossoms continued to fall, pink petals landing on white fur. The sun shone on the metal of the wheelchair. Everything was perfect. As the sun rose towards noon, Kesi remained by Emma's side. He didn't want to leave. Dr. Thompson approached with a basket of Kesi's favorite fruits. "Kesi," he said softly, "come on, buddy." The kind gorillas make only in very special situations, a mother's or a son's call. As they moved toward the center's exit, people around silently made way, still under the influence of that moment. Some were crying, some were just looking in shock, because what they had just seen wasn't normal animal behavior. It was, by all accounts, a miracle. When they got home, Sarah made tea for Emma, but she couldn't drink it. She felt empty inside, as if a part of her had stayed there with Kesi. That night, Emma lay in her bed, looked at the ceiling, and thought of the night she first saw Kesi, that tiny white infant, and how she had taken him in her arms, how she had made a promise: "I will protect you. I will love you." And she had kept her promise every day, every moment, doing what was best for Kesi. Days passed, weeks passed. Sarah brought her news of Kesi, said he was doing well. But there was something Sarah didn't say, that Kesi came to the bars every evening at sunset and looked at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, one morning when Emma woke up, she was having trouble breathing. The disease had progressed. Sarah called the ambulance, but Emma refused. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She wanted to be at home, in peace. That night, as she lay in her bed, she looked out the window. The moon was full, and white light was filtering into the room. At that moment, a strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, as if that giant hand were touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined Kesi, his white fur, his amber eyes, his giant but gentle hands. She imagined that last day, that perfect day, when cherry blossoms danced in the air, when the sun illuminated everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And that night, Emma fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but there was a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. When Dr. Thompson received the news, he cried. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, she had given him a life, a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew that morning. He hadn't come to the bars as usual. For the first time in days, he didn't break his morning routine. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. R. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favorite shawl, and one morning, in the early hours, he left it in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and at that moment his giant body trembled. His hands grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. It was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. Kesi had never forgotten that scent. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest, bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night. In the morning, he would take it with him, protect it as if it were a treasure. This was Kesi's way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal. He ate, he played, he lived. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars. He would sit there, wait, and perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there. In every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight, Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Center erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. It was a small but meaningful monument. On it was a figure of a woman and a gorilla, hand in hand, and underneath was an Indian. Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, watching silently from behind the bars. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side, looked at him. Those amber eyes gave Sarah a sad but grateful look. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" said Sarah with tears. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," said Sarah.